What if the person with the kindest heart was also the one with the least to give? Keep watching, because sometimes the poorest souls carry the richest light. Esther was just 24 years old, but life had already tested her far beyond her years. She had no parents, no siblings, no inheritance, and no real home, just a tiny broken-down room tucked behind a roadside shack in the bustling city of Lagos. No running water, no electricity, just four walls, a worn mattress, and a quiet sadness she never spoke of. Yet somehow Esther was always smiling. From sunrise to sunset, she stood behind her small food stall, made of old wooden planks and rusted iron sheets, selling rice beans and yam porridge to anyone who could afford a plate. Her stall wasn't fancy, but it stood under a large tree offering shade and comfort to those passing by. Children, bike riders, market women all found warmth in her presence. Despite her poverty, Esther greeted every customer with genuine kindness. "Good afternoon, sir." "You're welcome," she'd say, even when her feet ached or her stomach growled from hunger. Her slippers were falling apart. Her dress was patched in more places than it wasn't, but no one ever saw her complain. Her hands moved fast, cooking meal after meal, but her heart moved slowly, burdened by memories of loneliness and dreams she dared not say out loud. Esther knew what it felt like to go to bed hungry. That's why whenever someone came to her stall without money, she'd still serve them food quietly without judgment. Her friend Mama Titi once asked her, "Why are you always smiling, Esther? You're struggling just like the rest of us." Esther had just wiped a bench and was catching her breath when she answered softly, "Because crying won't bring food to my pot." It was a simple reply, but one that held deep strength. She had learned early that life wouldn't hand her comfort, so she chose compassion instead. When others grew bitter from hardship, Esther grew kinder. When others held back, she gave more. She didn't have much, but what little she had, she gave freely. What made Esther's heart so rare was not just her generosity, but her humility. She didn't think she was special. She didn't expect praise. She believed that feeding others, even when she herself had little, was simply what a good person does. And that belief, though simple, was powerful enough to shift the course of her entire life. She had no idea that her small daily acts of kindness were being watched, that somewhere in the shadows someone had seen her, that her story, her struggle, her strength, her smile was about to change everything. Because sometimes the greatest miracles come to those who never ask for them. And Esther, in all her quiet grace, was about to be reminded that the universe always remembers kindness even if the world forgets. He never said a word. He never asked for food. But every day she fed him. What kind of connection forms in silence? Stay with us, because what came next will stay in your heart forever. Every afternoon, as the sun beat down on the dusty streets of Lagos, a familiar sound echoed through the narrow road. Creak, creak, creak. It was the sound of an old rusted wheelchair rolling slowly over stones. People would turn their heads, not in curiosity, but in disgust. "Here comes that crazy man again," someone would whisper. "He smells," another would say, covering their nose. His legs were wrapped in stained bandages, his clothes were torn, and his face was caked in dust. No one knew his real name. Most just laughed or looked away. But Esther didn't. She called him Papa J. He came every single day, never speaking, never begging, just sitting quietly in his old chair beside Esther's food stall. While others dismissed him as mad, Esther saw something else. She saw a soul, not a burden. She never asked where he came from or why he couldn't walk. She never asked why he didn't speak. What mattered to her was that he was hungry, and so she fed him. Quietly, consistently, lovingly. Sometimes it was a plate of rice. Other times, beans and yam. And when she had very little, just a single plate left, she would still give it to him. One afternoon, after a long day of cooking, Esther had saved her last plate of food for herself. She hadn't eaten all day. But when Papa J rolled in looking more tired than usual, she looked down at her own food, paused, then gently placed the plate in front of him. "Eat," she said softly. His hands shook as he held the spoon. His eyes looked wet, but he didn't cry. He just bowed his head and ate. "Why do you keep feeding that beggar a woman?" once asked Esther in annoyance. Esther smiled and replied, "If I were the one in that wheelchair, wouldn't I hope someone would help me too?" It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was pure empathy. Papa J never asked for food or money. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never interrupted, never reached out. He just sat there like a shadow fading into the background of the noisy street. But Esther saw him every day. She made sure he knew he wasn't invisible. There was something sacred in the silence between them, a silent ritual of giving and receiving. No words, just warmth. And in that quiet bond, something extraordinary was forming. Esther didn't know it, but her small acts of kindness done without expectation were being etched into a bigger story. A story that was no longer just about a poor food seller and a crippled man. It was about unseen goodness, about kindness without cameras, and about love that didn't need language to be heard. Because sometimes the most beautiful connections are formed not through grand gestures or loud declarations, but through quiet, unspoken acts of care. And this one between Esther and Papa J was about to change both of their lives in ways no one could have imagined. But one moment would stand out from all the rest, a quiet decision made in hunger, one that would reveal the true depth of Esther's heart. She hadn't eaten all day. But when he whispered, "I haven't eaten in 2," what she did next stunned everyone. Stay with this story because that one plate of food changed everything. It had been an especially hot afternoon. Esther was tired, her feet swollen from standing since dawn. Business was slow, and all she had left was a single plate of beans and yam, her only meal for the day. She had been saving it for herself, planning to sit and eat once the sun dipped just a little lower. But just as she wiped the edge of her table and took a deep breath, she heard the familiar sound creak, creak, creak. Papa J was coming. He rolled in slowly, weaker than usual. His shoulders slumped forward, his hands trembling as he pushed the wheels. Esther could see something was off. He didn't greet her with his usual nod. Instead, his voice came out, cracked and low. "I was too weak to come yesterday. I haven't eaten in 2 days." Esther looked at him. Then she looked at the plate. That was her food. Her only food. The silence between them stretched. She felt the weight of her hunger, the ache in her stomach. But then she remembered what hunger really felt like and what it had once done to her. She didn't need to think twice. Without a word, she picked up the plate and placed it gently in front of him. "Here," she said softly. Papa J stared at it, then at her. "You're giving me your last plate again?" he asked, almost in disbelief. Esther nodded. "I can cook again when I get home," she replied. He took the spoon with shaking hands. His eyes glistened with emotion, but no tears fell. He just lowered his head and began to eat slowly. People walking by stared. Some shook their heads. One woman even muttered, "She's wasting food on that madman again." But Esther didn't care. She didn't do it for applause. She did it because it was right. That moment captured everything about who she was. She didn't give because she had abundance. She gave because she remembered what it felt like to have nothing. It wasn't about sympathy, it was about dignity. About saying you matter without needing to say anything at all. Little did she know that simple plate of food, the one she gave up in silence, would echo louder than any words. Someone was watching. Someone who saw not just a girl feeding a beggar, but a soul choosing compassion over comfort. And that small act born out of pure kindness would soon ripple through her life in a way she never imagined. Because kindness given in private often returns in public, and when it does, it doesn't come back small. But just when it seemed like their silent bond had become part of everyday life, something happened, something that would shake Esther to her core. He never missed a day. Rain or shine, he was always there until one morning he wasn't. What happened to Papa J? And why did it feel like something terrible had just begun? Esther had gotten used to the quiet rhythm of her days, waking before dawn, cooking pots of steaming rice and yam, sweeping the dusty ground, and waiting for that familiar creaking sound of Papa J's wheelchair. He had never failed to show up, not once. Not when it rained, not when he was sick, not even when the street was almost empty. So when morning came and there was no sign of him, Esther's heart skipped a beat, but she brushed it off. Maybe he's running late, she told herself. But by midday, the bench beside her stall was still empty. She tried to stay calm. Maybe he had just taken a different route. Maybe he was resting. But as hours passed and the sun began to set behind the buildings, a tight knot formed in her chest. That night, as she sat alone in her tiny room behind the shop, the plate she had prepared for him remained untouched. Her eyes didn't leave it, and her thoughts didn't leave him. The next day, she swept her stall early again, glancing down the road every few minutes. Still no creak of wheels, no dust-covered figure, no soft nod of greeting. She asked around. Mama Titi, the vegetable seller nearby, just laughed. That old man, maybe he crawled to another street. The bike man shrugged. He's probably tired of sitting all day. But none of those answers satisfied her. She checked the corners of the street. She asked the sachet water boys. She even scanned the nearby gutters. Her worry grew heavier by the minute. On the third day, Esther could barely eat. Her jollof rice, usually the talk of the street, made her stomach turn. Her smile, once warm and ready for everyone, had faded into a blank stare. That empty space beside her food stall had never looked so big. At night, she held the last plate she had served Papa J and whispered, "Even when you were weak, you still came. So why not now?" The wind coming through the window felt colder than usual. A part of her already knew something was wrong, deeply, painfully wrong. And just like that, her world shifted. She was no longer just a girl selling food. She was a girl waiting for someone who may never return. Someone whose absence felt louder than the busiest street. Someone who had once seemed invisible to the world, but had become everything to her. What had happened to Papa J? Where had he gone? And why did Esther feel like the answer was far more than just a missing man, but the beginning of a truth that would change her life forever? But just when her heart was about to give up hope, a stranger appeared with a message so strange, so unexpected, it felt like a whisper from fate itself. No return, no explanation, just a letter and a warning not to tell anyone. Who sent it, and why did it feel like the beginning of something much bigger? On the fourth morning of Papa J's disappearance, Esther sat beside her fire cutting onions with slow, absent-minded hands. Her eyes were puffy from lack of sleep, and her food once made with love now tasted like ash. That's when it happened. A black car pulled up right in front of her tiny roadside shop. It was sleek and shiny, too clean for a place like hers. A tall man stepped out. He didn't smile. He didn't greet her. He simply walked up and handed her a brown envelope. Esther blinked. "What is this?" she asked, her voice small. The man gave no answer. He simply said, "Read it, and don't tell anyone." Then without another word, he turned and got back in the car and drove away, leaving only a trail of dust and silence behind him. Esther stood frozen, the envelope trembling in her hand. She looked around, but no one else seemed to be watching. Slowly, she peeled it open. Inside was a single white paper. No name, no introduction, just 8 words. "Come to Green Hill Hotel by 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." Her heart skipped. Green Hill Hotel. That was a place she'd only heard of in whispers, a grand building in the rich part of Lagos where important people stayed. "Why me?" she whispered. "Who wrote this?" Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The sun above seemed too hot, the street noise too loud. She felt like she was inside a dream she didn't understand. Still, something inside her told her to go. By 3:30 p.m., Esther stood in front of her shop, clutching the envelope to her chest. She closed her wooden stall and locked it slowly, whispering, "God, please go with me." Then she flagged down a yellow tricycle and said the name out loud for the first time, Green Hill Hotel. As the tricycle sped through the streets, Esther looked out the window. The city was busy, markets, buses, people, but her world felt quiet. Her heart beat loud in her ears. What was waiting for her there? Was it Papa? Jay? Was he okay? Was this a trap, or was it a door opening to a world she could never have imagined? When the tricycle pulled up to the hotel gate, Esther's breath caught. The building was massive glass windows, marble walls, golden door handles. She'd never stood so close to something so elegant. 2 security guards approached her. She showed them the letter, barely able to speak her name. One of them looked at the paper and smiled gently. "Ah, Esther, someone is expecting you." Esther's heart pounded louder than ever. As a man in a black suit came to escort her inside, one thought repeated over and over in her mind. Who sent for me? And why do I feel like everything I thought I knew is about to change? As she stepped through the grand hallway, her feet trembling with each step, Esther had no idea that behind the next door waited a truth so unbelievable it would shake the ground beneath her path. She thought she was meeting a friend, but when the door opened, she saw a ghost from the streets, clean, powerful, and no longer broken. What if the beggar you helped turned out to be a billionaire? The tall man in the black suit led Esther down a long, quiet hallway. The marble floor echoed under her worn-out slippers, and golden lights sparkled overhead like stars in the sky. Her hands clutched the brown envelope tightly. At the end of the hall stood a tall wooden door. The man turned to her, nodded, and said, "Someone is waiting for you inside." Esther took a deep breath and slowly pushed open the door. And there he was. Sitting calmly in the middle of the room was Papa J, or at least the man she had always known as Papa J. But he looked nothing like the frail, dusty figure in the creaky old wheelchair who came to her stall every afternoon. His hair was neatly brushed. His face was clean, glowing with life. He wore a crisp white shirt with shining gold buttons, and a luxury wristwatch sparkled on his wrist. Even the wheelchair looked new, sleek, polished, nothing like the rickety contraption she had seen on the street. Esther froze. Her hands began to shake. "Papa J," she whispered, barely able to breathe. He gave her a soft smile. "Come in, Esther." She stepped in slowly, like someone walking into a dream. "Is this really you?" she asked, still not believing her eyes. The man nodded gently. "Yes. My name is not Papa J. My real name is Chief George." Esther's mouth dropped open. "Chief, yes," he said. "I'm a businessman, a billionaire. I own companies, hospitals, schools. I've built a life most people only see in magazines." Esther sank into the chair across from him, her heart pounding. Her thoughts were spinning. This couldn't be real. The man she had fed with her last plate of food, the man people laughed at and ignored, was one of the richest men in the city. "But why did you pretend?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked into her eyes. His voice was calm but serious. "Because I wanted to see who would care for someone who looked like they had nothing to offer. I wanted to find a person whose kindness was real." Tears welled up in Esther's eyes. "You gave me food when you were hungry yourself. You didn't ask for anything. You never looked at me with pity. You gave with joy." Chief George leaned forward. "That's why you're here. Every year I search for 10 people with hearts like yours. I help them build a new life because I believe that people who give without asking deserve to receive without limits." Esther couldn't speak. Her eyes overflowed. She had helped without expecting, and now she was being rewarded beyond her wildest dreams. What Esther didn't yet realize was that this meeting wasn't just a reunion. It was a beginning, a turning point, one that would lift her from the dust and place her among those the world would finally see. He didn't offer her money. He offered her a future. Because once a billionaire sees your heart and not your wallet, everything changes. What was this secret reward meant for only 10 people? Chief George's voice was calm, but the words he spoke were thunder in Esther's heart. Every year, he said, I search for 10 people who show true kindness, people who give not because they have much, but because they understand the weight of struggle. You, Esther, are one of them. She sat motionless. Her hands trembled on her lap. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She wanted to speak, but how could she? How do you thank someone for seeing you when the world never even looked? Chief George continued, his eyes never leaving hers. You didn't just feed a hungry man. You saw a human being. You gave me your food, your time, your warmth, all without knowing who I was or what I had. You didn't need a reason to be good. That's what makes you rare. Esther's throat tightened as tears returned to her eyes. She had spent her whole life giving from her nothing. And now someone had noticed. Someone powerful. And more importantly, someone who cared. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table toward her. Inside, he said, is not just a gift. It's a door, a new beginning. Her fingers hesitated as she picked it up. Inside was a document with her name at the top and something that made her gasp: proof of ownership. Property, land, business registration. the keys to something much bigger than a food stall under a tree. "This is yours now," Chief George said gently. "Not because you begged, not because you looked sad, but because your actions spoke when no one else was listening. You reminded me that even in a world full of noise, true goodness whispers, and I heard yours loud and clear." Esther pressed the envelope to her chest. Her heart felt like it could burst. She had never expected anything. Not thanks, not applause. But now she was being given a life she had only dreamed of, and she had earned it by being herself. "From today," Chief George said, "standing tall, you will not struggle again. But I hope you will continue to do what you've always done, spread light." Esther nodded through tears, unable to find words. She had no idea what was waiting for her beyond that hotel lobby. But something deep inside her knew her life was no longer the same. Because when you give from a heart that has nothing, sometimes the universe gives you back everything. And just when she thought the surprises had ended, Chief George turned, smiled, and said 5 words that made her legs tremble. "There's one more thing, Esther. What if someone handed you the keys to your dream? Not a gift, but a reward for kindness the world ignored." She fed him from a wooden shack. Now he's giving her a palace of food with her name on the door. Outside the hotel, 5 sleek black SUVs waited in a perfect line, their polished surfaces gleaming under the Lego sun. Esther stood frozen. Her old slippers suddenly felt out of place. Her patched dress clung tightly to her trembling frame. Chief George walked confidently to the lead vehicle, and one of his guards opened the door with swift precision. He looked back at Esther. "Come," he said softly. "I want to show you something." She hesitated only for a moment, then stepped in beside him. The doors closed and the convoy pulled out onto the road like something from a movie. Esther sat quietly, her fingers curled around the envelope still resting on her lap. As they drove, the city buzzed outside, busy streets, children playing, market noise in the distance. But inside the car there was only silence and rising wonder. After about 30 minutes, the cars turned onto a freshly paved road, lined with manicured flowers and modern buildings. Everything here looked new, expensive, peaceful. The convoy finally stopped in front of a large white building with glass walls that stretched from floor to ceiling. It was majestic, elegant, magical. Esther's eyes widened. A security guard opened her door, and as she stepped out, her gaze locked on a large golden sign above the building entrance. "Esther's Place, home of sweet meals." She covered her mouth, stunned. Is that my name?" she whispered. Chief George smiled. "Yes, this place is yours." Esther's knees nearly gave way. "Mine," she repeated in disbelief. He reached into his pocket again and handed her a ring of shiny keys. "Go ahead," he said. "Open the door." Hands trembling, Esther walked to the entrance. The keys clicked, the door opened, and she stepped into a space unlike anything she had ever known. The floors were spotless marble. The lights sparkled like stars above. The tables looked like they were carved from crystal. The chairs were soft and luxurious. The air smelled fresh and clean like peace. In the back, through a glass partition, she could see the kitchen. Stainless steel counters, industrial ovens, brand new refrigerators. Matching chef uniforms hung neatly on hooks. Everything was perfect. "You fed me when no one else would," Chief George said, walking beside her. "You gave joyfully from what little you had. Now I want to give you something, so you'll never worry about tomorrow again. This is where kings and queens will come to eat, and they will eat in a place built by a woman who knew the meaning of true kindness." Esther dropped to her knees. Her hands trembled as she covered her face. Her tears were no longer of hunger or loneliness, but of gratitude and awe. This was more than a restaurant. It was a symbol, a reward, a dream made real, because when the world forgets the kind, fate does not. But while the world now saw her as a woman of success, Esther never let it blind her to what truly mattered: the heart she once fed, the streets she once walked, and the hunger she once knew too well. She went from serving food on wooden benches to owning a palace of meals. But her mission didn't end there. What she did next will prove that some people don't just rise, they lift others with them. The shiny restaurant, the elegant office, the staff in crisp uniforms, all of it could have made Esther forget. But she didn't. Her name was on the door. Her face was framed on the wall. Yet her heart still lived in the streets where she came from. She remembered the faces that looked just like hers once did, tired, dusty, hungry, ignored. And so Esther did something most people wouldn't expect. She used her new fortune to give back. One morning, her manager walked into her office upstairs. "Madam," he said with a respectful bow, "the food truck is ready." Esther stood, her expression calm and focused. "Let's go." Outside, a large white van waited in the sunlight. Bold letters painted on the side read, "Esther's Food Love, Feeding the Hungry." It was her newest project, a mobile kitchen that drove across the city handing out hot meals to the homeless, to children on the street, to elderly women sitting by market stalls with nothing in their baskets. Every week without fail, Esther, dressed in plain clothes, stepped into the truck and rode to forgotten corners of the city. She didn't just send workers, she went herself. And when she arrived, she didn't stand above anyone. She served with her own hands. "Eat well," she'd say to a barefoot child. "You're not forgotten," she'd whisper to an old man sitting by a cracked sidewalk. Her staff admired her. One young volunteer once asked, "Madam, why do you still do this yourself?" "You don't have to anymore." Esther looked at him, touched her chest softly, and replied, "Kindness brought me here, so kindness must continue through me." That simple answer said everything. She had once cried behind a food stall with an empty belly. Now she watched others smile as they filled theirs. The roles had reversed, but her heart had stayed the same. As she walked down the street that day handing out bowls of rice and porridge, the sun cast a warm glow on her skin. She paused, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "Thank you, Chief George. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." And then she turned, climbed back into the truck, and drove off toward another forgotten street. Because for Esther, success wasn't about rising alone. It was about returning to lift others who still sat where she once sat. In the end, it wasn't the restaurant or the building or the title that made her story powerful. It was the fact that even after everything changed, she never did. And as the wheels of her food truck rolled into yet another hungry street, Esther knew her story was no longer just hers. It had become a living message, a reminder to the world that goodness, even in silence, always echoes back. They say kindness doesn't pay. But what if it saves a life and then transforms yours? Before you scroll away, listen closely, because this story carries a lesson you might need more than you realize. Esther's journey had begun with nothing but a patched-up dress, a warm heart, and a wooden bench under a tree. No one had expected anything from her. No cameras followed her. No crowd applauded her. But she gave anyway. She fed a stranger with her last plate of food without knowing he was a man of power. She gave without calculating, loved without a motive, helped without expecting. And in doing so, she unlocked something most people never find: the reward that only pure-hearted service can bring. Her restaurant became a landmark, her food truck a lifeline. Her name, once unknown, now carried weight in both wealthy neighborhoods and broken ones. Yet she never sought fame. She didn't stand on podiums or post her deeds online. She believed in quiet kindness, the kind that touches a soul before it touches a headline. Every morning before her restaurant opened, she'd stand by the window of her office, looking down at the world she once walked barefoot. And every evening after the last food box had been delivered, she'd whisper a quiet prayer, not asking for more, but simply giving thanks. Because in her heart, she knew something many still didn't understand. Kindness is never wasted. You may not see the fruit today. You may not get a thank you. You may even be mocked, used, or ignored. But every act of compassion sown from love plants a seed in the universe, and one day it blooms where you least expect. Esther's life proved that. From a roadside shack to a shining food plaza. From feeding one broken man to nourishing thousands. All because she chose not to look away when others did. Because she saw a soul, not a situation. And because even when her hands were empty, her heart was full. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether your kindness matters, let this story be your answer. Yes, it does. Even when no one sees. Even when you feel unseen. One day, someone, maybe a stranger, maybe the universe itself, will return it in a way that reminds you you were never forgotten. As Esther's truck disappeared down a long, dusty road, sunlight fell gently across the name on its side. Esther's Food Love, Feeding the Hungry. Behind her full belly smiled. Ahead of her, more lives waited to be touched. And in that moment, the little girl who once gave from nothing had become a woman who gave everything. Not for glory, not for gold, but because she had learned the greatest truth of all: when you give with a good heart, the world will one day find its way back to you. In a world that often rewards noise, appearance, and wealth, this story reminds us of something far more powerful: the quiet strength of a kind heart. Esther had nothing, not status, not comfort, not support, but she gave from what little she had, expecting nothing in return. And in doing so, she changed her life and the lives of countless others. For older audiences who may feel overlooked or forgotten, this story is a gentle reminder that your goodness, your values, and your simple acts of compassion still matter. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in how many lives you touch when no one is watching. Even when the world moves fast and people become hardened, kindness remains timeless. It may take months, years, or a lifetime, but kindness always finds its way back. So keep doing good even if no one claps. Keep giving even when your hands feel empty. Because somewhere down the road, your quiet acts of love may be the very reason someone else believes in goodness again. And in the end, that is the kind of legacy that truly lasts.